So a few of the verses that were left out of this reading today, it's left out of our particular text for the day, but as a part of the story. God said to Elijah, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. I should say this, some of the kids who are here, there is a table in the back right behind Dan and Nancy back there. If you guys want to go color, there's a couple places. It's right back there. You can go. You can go ahead and just be quiet, that's all. That's asking for a lot. You guys did so great last week, though. There were 4 or 5 of them back there coloring, and we didn't even know it. Many live their lives in loneliness, even though they are around people all the time. Consequently, being alone is painful for them, and they simply avoid being alone. And there is a plethora of activity available to us to avoid being alone, some of it pretending to be very important: the accumulation of money, the taking of yet another volunteer position, the pursuit of another project when you have several unfinished already. And we also avoid being alone through things that don't pretend to be important, but simple distractions that we feel we deserve because we have been worn down and exhausted by our level of activity and work. You know these: buzzing out on TV or video games, partying, Facebook, playing golf. While none of these activities or distractions are bad on their own, for many people, they create a pattern of life which simply avoids being alone, being still, being silent, because when they do so, they feel lonely. But what if the appropriate way of dealing with loneliness is being alone in a different way, in a way that we call solitude? Kent Nerburn writes these words: "Loneliness is like sitting in an empty room and being aware of the space around you. It is a condition of separateness. Solitude is becoming one with the space around you. It is a condition of union. Loneliness is small, solitude is large. Loneliness closes in around you. Solitude expands toward the infinite, toward God." This is one of the lessons that comes from our story about Elijah today. After his contest with the 450 prophets of Baal, which comes immediately before this text, and he has won this contest, after he has ordered the Israelites to kill all 450 prophets, after Queen Jezebel says that he is a dead man, after he runs in fear for days and exhausts himself, then he comes to the mountain and hears the voice of God. And it is not in the great activity of the distraction of wind or the powerful activity of earthquake or lightning. but it is in the sound of sheer silence in solitude. So I want to suggest a few things for those of us who feel lonely a lot and others of us who feel lonely only a little bit, for we live in a culture of loneliness. I want to say this as a way to combat loneliness. Lose the I from the center of understanding. Lose comparison, for comparison is self-judgment. And find time for solitude. Lose two things, find one thing. Lose the I, lose comparison, find solitude. And if you do so, you will never be alone. For you will hear the sheer silence of God, and you will discover community. Lose the I from the center of our understanding. Elijah has the I at the center of his understanding, and he feels very lonely. He says, as he's setting up the contest between him and the prophets of Baal, he says to the crowd that is gathered there, I, even I only am left in Israel who is faithful to God. And later when God asks, why are you here? He says, I have been zealous for God, and I alone am left. He says it twice. And the writer here, by this repetition and magnification, is pointing us to the fact that Elijah himself has his I, that is capital I, not E-Y-E, at the center of his understanding of the world, even though he is doing the work of God. Elijah is complaining because he believes he's the only one in Israel who is not bowed to Baal. With this understanding of himself at the center, he is taking on the entire burden of God's vision for God's people on his own back. And when our self is at the center, we think we are alone. When our self is at the center, we think we are alone, and we do stupid things that are motivated by concern for ourselves. As many of you know, I came into the United Church of Christ because I left the Evangelical Covenant Church because they believed that people in the queer community were second-class citizens. And though I knew that there were a few others who were on the same page with me, I did not consult with them before I raised my hand and spoke on the floor of an annual meeting before 2,000 people. I stood up and said, there was no doubt that Jesus loved every human being. And with my own little voice, but in a very loud way, I accused the denomination of being unchristian. At which point, the president of the denomination came to the microphone and blasted me for such an accusation. He pointed to verses from the Bible. He pointed to scholarly papers that had been written. He pointed to common decency to prove that I was wrong. And afterwards, there was thunderous applause for him. And I felt very alone. Later, one of my friends who felt the same way I did came up to me and said, if you would have talked to me about it ahead of time, I would have told you, don't give the president a chance to speak on the floor about this issue, because he will whip up the crowd in opposition and we will lose ground. But it was, I felt, important for me to stand up and oppose the president in front of all these people. And I did something stupid, which did not help our cause. And I felt alone. Elijah also did something stupid, or at least questionable. After the 450 prophets of Baal had been unable to get their god, Baal, to burn the bull that had been slaughtered and laid upon the wood, then it was Elijah's turn to stand up. And Elijah stands up and pours water on the bull and on the wood, and then does a simple prayer, and boom, like sparks to gasoline, whoosh, the whole thing goes up and burns to a crisp. And right there, he had won the contest. He had done the thing, But he doesn't stop there. He keeps going. He turns to the crowd and says, I want you to grab all of these prophets, all 450 of them, take them down to the water and kill them all. And they did so. And it was after that, of course, King Ahab and Queen Jezebel threatened his own life, and he took off and started running and ran for 40 days and 40 nights and ends up at the place where he is in our text today. But what if this? What if he hadn't done that? I know it's just imagination, but what if he hadn't said to the crowd, okay, do them all in? Got them up to a frenzied froth. What if he would have just stood back? I wonder what might have happened. Might the prophets have gone, whoa, your Yahweh is something else. How'd that happen? What's going on here? Man, our Baal, he's really, I don't know. We got to think about this. This is a little crazy. Hold on. Let's just stop right here. Maybe we should go talk to King Ahab and Queen Jezebel about this thing. I don't know. What might have happened? We look at it and we think, well, this is just the way it was and that's the way it was supposed to be. But I don't believe it. Because Elijah's had problems with his ego from the beginning. Something else might have happened had he not told them to do that. So I'm saying he did something stupid, or at least questionable. If you want to lose your loneliness, drop the I. Secondly, in order to discover that we are never alone, we must lose comparison, because comparison is not only judgment of others, it's judgment of self. You see what Elijah says to God at the end of his exhausting journey? He says, take my life, for I'm no better than my ancestors. He is judging himself in comparison to his ancestors. He is alluding to the Israelites wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, as he has just run through the wilderness for 40 days. And they were complainers. And they didn't like the food that God provided. They didn't like the accommodations. They cheated God and each other, and they built a golden calf to worship. They had trouble with the I at the center of their understanding, as well as Elijah. And here is Elijah judging his worth in comparison to them. But who says his worth is in comparison to anything else, to anyone else? I mean, this is a big deal to us. We baptize Zeke today, and we say, with this baptism, the dying to self and rising to the love of God, we're saying that in and of himself, he is a valuable, worthy human being. Not in comparison to anyone else. He is a valuable, worthy human being. We hold this as an assumption to be most certainly true. There's little need to illustrate this point. We have an economy that's largely built on comparison. We are taught to want things that are bigger and better than our neighbors. Status is status because it is in comparison to those who are without it. The advertising world depends on us to be judging ourselves in want and lacking, and then consequently needing their product to make us better than our ancestors, our enemies, our neighbors. But the more you compare yourselves to others, the more you will feel alone. It doesn't matter if you compare yourself to be better or worse than the other, you will still feel more alone. Lose the eye out of the center of your understanding, lose comparison, and find time for solitude. And you will never be alone, for you will hear the sheer silence of God and discover community. I love this picture of Elijah on the mountain because it's normative for solitude. For when you first go silent, there's a lot of noise that happens. Just try, sitting down to be silent for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, a half hour. And it's like the wind is blowing your thoughts hither and yon. What you did yesterday, what you left undone today, what someone else did to you last week, what you want to do to them in retaliation. The I, again, is showing itself as the center of understanding. You might be on the way, but you're not there yet. God hasn't arrived. But then you begin to sense the earthquake and the lightning, the foundation of your world cracking open because the assumptions upon which you have lived are being questioned. Why was it so important for you to get up and stand up in front of those 2,000 people? Why didn't you consult your friends? Why was it so urgent that you had to do that then? Why didn't you reach out to others for help? And as the assumptions that come along with your I being at the center, you begin to see that it is not at the center. That you are connected to creation, to people, enveloped in the Spirit. And you become aware that there is something else at work in your life that you must follow, whatever your name is for it. God, your higher self, your soul, whatever you call it, it makes you part of something much larger. And this is what happens over time when you find time for solitude. This is at the end of Elijah's big prophetic work, and God gives him the job of anointing others to follow him. He's kind of putting him on the bench. God tells him that he wasn't the only one that was faithful to Yahweh. Not even close to the only one. He says there were 7,000 others. So his whole point of view in life was changed. Well, I believe this message is particularly important for our day. The violence against the queer community in Orlando, you know the numbers, 49 people dead, 53 people injured. Almost all of them people of color from the Latino community. Others scapegoating the Muslim community because the shooter was a Muslim, claiming allegiance to terrorist groups. Don't you feel emotionally exhausted from the mass killings over the several past years? Fear rises up. We feel alone. Sometimes we have the desire to hole up somewhere with an arsenal of guns to protect ourselves and our families. Sometimes we just want to bomb Syria and obliterate ISIL, thinking that will get rid of the problem. Don't get me wrong. I know that Jesus said, love your enemies, and I believe Jesus is right. But I also think there are times when the lesser evil is resorting to force. However, as our quote says today in the bulletin, hate can never overcome hatred. Only love can do that. Loneliness shrouds the world. The LGBT community goes to the polls to celebrate and let loose because they aren't welcome in other places. Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Buddhists lack any real understanding of the others because they live from the I of their own religion. Middle-class suburbanites like ourselves lack a real understanding of what it means to be a poor person of color in an urban center. And so we all feel lonely, separated, threatened, afraid. We need the space of solitude, sheer silence, where we live in a condition of union, not separateness, and we discover that we are not alone. And if we can do this, then neighbors become family, enemies become friends, and our soul, God, our higher self, becomes our most cherished companion. This, I think, is central at this moment as we face the noise of the media that Dawn spoke of, and as the news comes rushing over us. We need to find that space of solitude where we lose the I, where we lose comparison, and we find